Hello, and welcome to the Behavior Education Connection, the podcast that works to connect the world of behavior analysis and the world of education. We focus on topics important to behavior analysts who work in the public schools and those who support them. Join us and spend time gaining insights and ideas as our host talks with fellow behavior analysts as well as other experts in the field. Hello and welcome to the Behavior Education Connection. I'm your host, Selena Layden, and I am with Karen Berlin today. Hi, Karen.
Hello, Selena.
Can you tell us who you are today?
Well, as you said, I'm Karen Berlin, and I work at the TTAC at George Mason University. And if you don't know, the TTACs are training and technical assistance centers that are located across universities in Virginia. And our mission is to provide technical assistance and support to educators and school personnel who are engaged in special education for students with disabilities, students who have IEPs. So I have been doing that work for a number of years and currently serve as a co-director at the TTAC at George Mason.
Well, Karen, I'm really excited to have you here today. And what Karen did not add is she's also a BCBA. And so today we are talking about BCBAs and leadership, and especially in the educational setting. So Karen, we're going to jump right in. Why would we be talking about leadership and BCBAs in schools? Why does that matter?
It's a great question, Selena. I think anytime we think about the role of a BCBA, we are talking about leadership, regardless of context, but most especially in the public school setting. One of the tenets of being a behavior analyst is modeling and providing opportunities for changes in behavior. And by definition, leaders are leading change. And so whether on a small scale of, well, I wouldn't say small, but rather if you think about a continuum from individual student behavior change to classroom change to school environment change to whole systems-wide change, behavior analysts are integral in that work, to the point that I've had the privilege of being a part of Virginia's Behavior Analyst Network. And that group, as you know, created standards for behavior analysts in public schools. And there's a whole strand that fifth element of those standards is around leadership. And it highlights the work that we have before us, the opportunity that we have before us to be a part of change and to lead change. So in short, being a behavior analyst anywhere equates to being a leader. But in a public school setting, it really is being a leader of effective change that impacts outcomes for students. And in my particular field, for students with disabilities.
I appreciate you bringing up the professional standards, and we spend a lot of time on that in the work that we do together. When we developed those, we had a lot of conversations around leadership and should that be included, and shouldn't it be included, and why. And we decided it was really important, and I personally do feel it's really important because I agree with you that when you are a behavior analyst in a school, you are automatically a leader in your role, and that can look different based on what your role is. But we bring a lot of knowledge and we have a lot of expertise to share. And how we do that, we need to think about how we can effectively create positive change for our students, our teachers, everyone we work with. I would say, though, I don't know that everyone who's a BCBA feels like they're a leader or feels like they know how to be a leader. And so if you were talking to someone who's new in the field or new in education, what are some tips that you would give them of skills that they really need to think about or hone in on to develop in order to kind of work towards being an effective leader?
Great question, Selena. I love the how. I love the focus on the how, because the what, yes, we all can be leaders, but what do we do and how do we do it? And I think historically, an observation I would make is that BCBAs may have perceived themselves as leaders in public school settings, but that how actually created some barriers because we do have a strong scientific basis for what we do. We do have knowledge, we do have expertise. Sometimes we made the misstep of defining leadership as takeover or authoritarianism, like listen to me, or everybody step back. I'm going to come in and show you how to do it. And surprise, surprise, that wasn't always warmly received because our colleagues in public school settings also have expertise and training and experience and
It's not
professional
really
knowledge.
reinforcing, right? It's not really reinforcing to hear like, I know everything and you don't know anything.
Well, and so it makes that how really important. I mentioned modeling, and I think BCBA is keeping in mind that they want to model the behaviors that they want to see in others, right? Like we want to be thinking about the kind of professionalism, the kind of collaboration, the kind of reciprocity, trust that we want to experience in our professional relationships is what we want to model. And so, I think if I was going to try and keep it digestible, the things that I would focus on is a commitment to data-informed decision making. That is our bread and butter. That is the way that we do our work. And so modeling at every opportunity that we can, the impact of data and the power of data-informed decision making, not in a cross your arms. Okay, where's the data? There's no data. There's no meeting. I'm out of here. Like that doesn't advance data-informed decision making. But meeting people where they are, asking the question, what data do we have? Not waiting until the Cadillac data dashboard is there before we start discussions, but listening well, identifying what is the challenge, the problem, the interference that people want to address, and gently seeking that data, asking what data do we have, what data could we collect, and really modeling that data-informed decision-making process. That this is our baseline, this is what we know, let's hypothesize together and try an intervention. Let's look at our data and feel that camaraderie of teamwork in making decisions, and teamwork in implementation, and teamwork in evaluation. So I think that commitment to data-informed decision making, how change really happens, modeling what is our goal, what is it that we're working toward, modeling having a plan. We're all good at work and we're all good at creating work, but that ability to determine, is it meaningful work? Is it moving towards the outcome that we want? So, modeling the elements of the data-informed decision-making process, modeling our professionalism, and I think around that, both written and verbal communication, the way that we say things, the way that we communicate our input to others, the value that we put on other people's input, our ability to listen, our own cognitive flexibility, the ability to say, "Oh, that's really interesting. I hadn't thought of it that way before. I hadn't really considered that." And the big thing, I think, is just dependability and reliability. Like when we say we're going to do something, we do. We follow through because we want other people to follow through, on what we are seeking as well. So data-informed decision-making, professionalism, a huge commitment to collaboration. One of the biggest distinctions between a clinical setting and a classroom setting is the collaboration. And nobody ever works in an island, but the collaboration in a school setting is with a interdisciplinary team. It's with people who bring varied expertise and knowledge, and they are colleagues. They are our collaborative partners. So really seeking to be in effective working relationships, really seeking to be partners, being fully engaged in the shared work, and demonstrating a commitment to our own continuous growth and improvement, and modeling ourselves as learners, our willingness to seek out more information, maintaining our ethical standards, and just modeling that same openness to feedback that we, if we want to be in a culture of feedback where we can share feedback with others, that we are open to receiving it.
Yeah, I really like your point about being an effective colleague, right? Because I think in schools, collaboration is ultimately required. Like, I don't think you have a choice as to whether you collaborate. It's how you're going to collaborate, but there's no choice as to whether you're going to. But I think taking that a step further from a BCBA perspective, we can't just collaborate for our own gains, right? Like we have to effectively collaborate with a lot of people for better outcomes for students, but also for the better outcomes of the adults that we're supporting and working with. And I think being an effective colleague really does require effective collaboration, not just I sat in the same room, I heard what you said, and now we're going to do what I want to do, or which sometimes I feel like, but no, but what does that actually mean and look like versus like, okay, yeah, I collaborate because we sit in meetings together. And so I don't know if you have thoughts about what are some specific considerations around how to be that effective collaborator beyond just being in the same location and working on the same things.
Yeah, I think that what works for students works for people. And so we talk about pairing and being a reinforcer, and that is a, a motivating operation, that's the beginning of a effective relationship. And so I think demonstrating reinforcing behavior, and just as we know for students from preference assessments, that doesn't mean the same thing for everyone, but really seeking to be helpful, not being a doormat, or draining yourself out like a washcloth trying to meet everybody's needs. But I mentioned active listening, effective listening prior, but oftentimes we can perceive what might really make a difference in a situation, or could be a support to someone. And so the same way we think about cognitive demand or task demand for students, I think with adults, like being aware of what is that just right amount of support or information or resource that I could share now. And how, when I think about sharing, do I want somebody to just drop something and then run and tell me to figure it out? Or do I appreciate when they come alongside and show, and support and ask follow-up questions and see if I need anything else? And so I think effective collaboration means genuinely and authentically being interested in the other people as people and their expertise, being competent in our behavioral expertise, staying in our lane, but owning our competence and being willing to share what will make a difference, what will work. Sometimes we've used the phraseology engineering a success, but identifying that one or cluster of small things that could make a big difference, and providing the support necessary for that to make that big difference. I mentioned earlier seeking feedback. I think a culture of feedback and mutuality means it's reciprocal, like following up and saying, hey, I brought you those resources and I suggested that, just checking in. How was that for you? Like, was that too much? And they say, well, honestly, it was like I clicked on the first 3 links and that was great. But like looking at the rest of the page, I was just exhausted and, I couldn't do anymore. And then saying, thank you so much. That's helpful to me. Like pinpointing, great, thank you. And then the next time following up and doing what they said, would make a difference. Like, hey, I've got 20 more things I could share with you, but I picked out the top three. And again, just listening and responding to what people are saying and evidencing that authentic interest in shared outcomes, like, keeping the focus on the goal, keeping the focus on the data, celebrating as we're making progress, like, hey, like we did this together. Look how he's doing, look how she's doing. So I think keeping that central focus on data, keeping that's what we're modeling, keeping those measures in place, showing how to celebrate that and share it back out, to share the success so that it is truly a shared success and not just like the behavior analyst magic, but the team magic of what the team accomplished. And being comfortable with evaluation, both of others and of ourselves.
Yeah, I think that feedback is really important, and it's hard to ask for feedback about yourself, right? I admit it. I don't love being like, "Well, did that work for you? Like, is what I said okay? Is how I presented this okay?" It's hard to ask for that, but I think to your other point that I want to talk about for a minute, if we don't have that mindset of continuous growth and development, then we will never get better. And if we want teachers to have buy-in, if we want teams to want to work with us, because if they don't want to work with us, we can't be effective. We have to be willing to be a little vulnerable and ask for that feedback. And then we have to be willing to also learn from our colleagues. And I think one of the things that happens in schools is we realize we have this scope of competence. But if we're going to be effective in schools, I do believe we have to push our scope of competence. And so how do we do that in an ethical way? How do we do that in an effective way so that we can have this cycle of continual growth? One of the things that I always try to remind myself is that good leaders are good learners. And so if we aren't willing to learn, we are not going to be effective in our leadership. And so, what are some things that you would recommend that our school based BCBAs really try to focus on as far as either skills, content, um, application practice, whatever it may be? What are some things that can help us have this continuous mindset of growth?
I love that. I'm going to steal your quote. Good leaders are good learners. Great leaders are great learners,
I don't
right?
know that I could take credit for that, but I don't know where I heard it, but I think it makes sense.
Well, and I'm actually going to pay attribution to you, Selena. I think modeling both the joy and the necessity of continuous learning is important. And so, when you started the podcast, you talked about the how and specific skills. And I do think that modeling of grounding ourselves in research, it's not that everybody's got to go out and read every study, but it is much more palatable to accept something that has an evidence base as opposed to Karen Berlin's opinion. You could say to paint the walls pink, and I could say to paint them green, and it's just my opinion against yours. But once I start to show, I can't remember what color I said for me, but like green has this calming effect or whatever, like there's more reason to take me seriously, right? So I think demonstrating the need for things beyond our own, well, I think, and grounding ourselves in research, and then again, that authentic interest in everything that contributes to the classroom learning environment. I think when you asked specifically about BCBAs in public schools, I think the special education process, learning about IEPs, the role of team members on an IEP, understanding special education eligibility, like what does that mean? Understanding instruction. We are behavior specialists, but we really can't tease out academics from behavior. We're all in a shared process of instruction. So understanding that instructional process, understanding the tools that will help teachers. Like we're focused on data, but how do walkthrough tools and observations, and how does that help? And how can we merge our science and our tools with what educators and other school personnel are doing, so that we're not trying to change everybody into behavior analysts, but we've got complementary skill sets to do that. We have to understand what other people are doing. And I think another example is, post-COVID there and prior, there is a big focus on mental health and mental wellness. And we look at the learning environment. We look at the whole student. We can't just like put on our magnifying glasses and look only at behavior, because that's not true. Nothing happens in isolation. So I think demonstrating our willingness to learn and grow is actually the fertile soil for collaboration, because there are things we can learn and grow about together simultaneously, and then we bring our unique skill set and perspective to that. So I think it's essential, because it's kind of off-putting to come across experts who know it all and don't need to learn anything else because they already know it all. And within our field and external to our field, much more inviting are those who are excited about learning, those who are eager to continue on that quest of, I don't know the answer yet, but I think we can figure it out. That's a contagious way of being. And what you've done with the network and just creating this, that's why the network exists, right? Like these ongoing opportunities for BCBAs to engage with meaningful, relevant learning, CEs that are contextually about being a BCBA in public schools. Evidence is like we're all on this continuous journey of learning.
Yeah, and I would say, if you don't have a formal state network, we're very lucky in Virginia. We have this formal state network, and there's others that are forming. But if you don't have that kind of support, I still think it's important to have those networks. And so, however you're going to form this network, whether it's I find other people I went to grad school with, I find other people in neighboring school districts who are doing similar things to me. I think that is a good way, one, to find supports that you probably need. And then two, it is a good way to help yourself stay in this mindset of continuous growth, right? Like I'm gonna call Karen and I'm gonna say, I have this problem and I don't really know how to solve it. And Karen can say, well, have you thought about this? Or do you know about this? And it pushes you almost like a peer mentor, essentially. One of the things I talk about a lot is, we finish supervision and then there's kind of this cliff, right? Like we finish supervision, we take our exam, yay, we're a BCBA. And now what? And now what do we do? And I would say that moment in our career can be such a vulnerable moment because we don't have someone who's supervising us anymore. We may not have those established networks, and we may not be as good at our craft as that we hopefully aren't as good as our craft as we're going to be in the future because we're continuing to grow. And so regardless, wherever you are in your career, I think it's good to have these networks, but especially when you're at that point of your career where you're newly certified and trying to kind of take those first steps to figure out what it means to be a BCBA for you and what your scope of competence looks like. So, well, Karen, this was a wonderful conversation. I really appreciate all of your input. I think it's so important that we think about leadership in the context of being a school-based BCBA and what that means. So I really do appreciate the conversation today. Is there anything that you want to leave us with?
That's a loaded question, right? Like, here we go, another 2 hours. No, I think that final thought is there is some research out there that talks about the effectiveness of a leader is as much about what happens when they're not present as when they are. And I think that the truth behind that is if you've led well, things are not dependent upon you or restricted to just you, but you've led change, you've led systems change, you've led process change. So things are in place to carry forward as a result of your leadership, but not necessarily because of you. And so, or your necessity of being present. And so I think one of the questions is, you asked about that how, and the skill piece is, how can I do what I'm doing in such a way that I'm no longer necessary, right? And we do that with our students. Like, we're always looking at that gradual release of responsibility and building independence and ownership of skills so that they can continue forward with, from very frequent reinforcement to more interval reinforcement to, just random, that it really is maintained and generalized. So I think in thinking about leading, we want to do whatever that we're doing in such a way that it might continue when we're not there. And so when I talk about those data-informed decision-making practices, the teaming and the collaboration, the, setting goals, working from a plan, progress monitoring, evaluating, like doing those things routinely enough that it becomes a way of work for others and not just BCBAs, is the means by which any and every BCBA can truly be a leader, because those practices, as they're adopted, will become truly critical components of systems change. So, when I say think about how you're no longer necessary, that's not like delegating to everybody else to do your work.
Oh, and you'll
but
always
it
have a
is,
job, right? Like, we
yeah, but
always
it's
have a job.
but it's doing your work in such a way that the work continues in your presence and in your absence.
Yeah, which is important because you can't be everywhere at all times, right? And there are not enough BCBAs in the world to fill all the need that exists. And so I agree with that. I think it's a really important component of the work that we're doing and the dissemination of our science. So, Karen, this was a great conversation. Thank you so much for being with me today.
I always love being with you, and you can tell I don't have a problem talking. So thank you for the opportunity, and I look forward to seeing people at upcoming VAPSPAN events.
Great. Well, thank you to our listeners for listening today, and we hope to see you on the next episode.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Behavior Education Connection. Join us next time for another great conversation about behavior analysis in the schools. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on an episode. Sending out a special thanks to the Virginia Department of Education for supporting our work. We look forward to connecting with you all again soon.